UN rights chief sounds alarm over escalating violence in South Sudan. September 26, 2025, Geneva. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk on Friday voiced deep concern over the rapidly deteriorating security situation in South Sudan, warning that the country is on the brink as political tensions escalate and civilian casualties mount. According to data collected by the UN Human Rights Office, at least 1,854 civilians have been killed between January and September this year, alongside 1,693 injured, 423 abducted, and 169 subjected to sexual violence. This represents a 59% increase in victims compared to the same period in 2024. Turk cautioned that the real figures may be higher due to limited access for monitors. The first quarter of 2025 recorded the highest number of civilian victims in a single quarter since 2020, according to the Human Rights Division of the UN mission in South Sudan, UNMISS. With fears of a collapse of the 2018 revitalized peace agreement and a return to widespread violence intensifying, I deeply worry for the plight of civilians in South Sudan, Turk said. The surge in violence has been attributed to both communal clashes, which rose by 33% year-on-year, and military operations by the South Sudanese army, including reported airstrikes in populated areas. The UN documented widespread destruction of homes, schools, health facilities, and other civilian infrastructure, along with at least 45 extrajudicial killings by security forces, among them 2 boys. Men, women, and children have been killed, injured, and displaced, and homes, schools, health centers, and other infrastructure destroyed, with devastating consequences on civilians. This is unconscionable and must stop, Turk stressed. He urged all parties to respect international humanitarian law and protect civilians, while calling on the government to ensure that the ongoing high-profile trial of First Vice President Riek Machar and senior opposition figures meets international human rights standards. The trial, which began on September 22 in Juba, involves Machar and other senior members of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition, SPLMIO. They face charges including murder, treason, and crimes against humanity linked to a March attack on a South Sudan People's Defense Forces, SSPDF, base in Nasir, Upper Nile State. I urge the parties to the revitalized peace agreement and the international community, including regional bodies, to do everything in their power to pull South Sudan from the brink, Turk concluded. UK, Norway press South Sudan on transparency in oil revenue management. September 26, 2025, Juba. South Sudan's Finance Minister Athiang Daeng Athian on Thursday held talks with the ambassadors of the United Kingdom and Norway, who urged greater transparency in the management of oil revenues and public funds amid persistent concerns over corruption. The meeting in Juba focused on the execution of the national budget, the payment of salaries for civil servants and organized forces, and the clearance of arrears. Diplomats stressed that stronger accountability is essential to stabilize the country's fragile economy. South Sudan, independent since 2011, remains heavily reliant on oil, which accounts for the vast majority of government revenue. Although reports suggest the country produces between 30 and 40 tons of gold annually, little of that income is reflected in the national budget. Non-oil revenues also remain underdeveloped and opaque. Norwegian Ambassador Roar Hogstad said the talks emphasized the role of the Public Financial Management Oversight Committee in promoting transparency. We were asking the minister for more transparency on all revenues and their allocations, transparency on salary payments and arrears, credible quarterly budget execution reports, transparency on oil-backed loans and their fiscal implications, and finally progress on the transition to a centralized system of national accounts, Hogstad said. British Ambassador David Ashley, who this month succeeded Norway as co-chair of the Oversight Committee, underscored the importance of sound financial governance as external aid declines. It's very important that South Sudan uses effectively the resources it has, including oil revenue, Ashley said. From our perspective, public financial management is an important institution to ensure that the revenues are used effectively for the benefit of the people of South Sudan. Ashley noted that Minister Athian agreed with the committee's priorities and voiced support for its objectives. Nearly 30,000 displaced after rebel attack in Mundri East County. September 25, 2025, Western Equatoria State. Local officials say nearly 30,000 civilians have fled their homes in Mundri, East County, Western Equatoria State, after forces from the National Salvation Front, NAS, and the Sudan People's Liberation Army in opposition, SPLAO, attacked a South Sudan People's Defense Forces, SSPDF, base in Ketiba Payam early Wednesday morning. County Commissioner John Henry Ngalamu confirmed the clashes began around 4 a.m., leaving the entire Payam's population displaced. Many are without food, medicine, and basic services, Ngalamu told Radio Tamazuch, appealing for urgent humanitarian assistance. A resident who fled the area described dire conditions. The elderly and children are suffering. There is no food or medicine, and treating the sick is very difficult, the resident said, requesting anonymity for security reasons. Thomas Arena, deputy chairperson of the Relief and Rehabilitation Commission, RRC, in Western Equatoria, said families are scattered, complicating verification of displacement figures. Food and non-food items are the most urgent needs, he stated. We call on the government and humanitarian agencies to respond quickly and work to restore peace. Civil society activist Edmund Yakani condemned the fighting, urging both the government and armed groups to settle political disputes through dialogue. The situation in Ketiba remains tense as humanitarian agencies begin assessing the crisis. The NAS, led by General Thomas Cirillo, and the SPLAIO faction under acting chairman Nathaniel Oyet, have recently intensified attacks on SSPDF positions, particularly in Morobo and Ye counties in central Equatoria. Oyet assumed day-to-day leadership of the SPLAIO after First Vice President Riek Machar and his allies were placed under house arrest in Juba in March. Unlike Machar, NAS never signed the 2018 revitalized peace agreement, and the two groups have since forged a military alliance, declaring the deal collapsed. The situation in Ketiba remains tense as humanitarian agencies begin assessing the crisis. The NAS, led by General Thomas Cirillo, and the SPLAIO faction under acting chairman Nathaniel Oyet, have recently intensified attacks on SSPDF positions, particularly in Morobo and Ye counties in central Equatoria. Oyet assumed day-to-day leadership of the SPLAIO after First Vice President Riek Machar and his allies were placed under house arrest in Juba in March. Unlike Machar, NAS never signed the 2018 revitalized peace agreement, and the two groups have since forged a military alliance, declaring the deal collapsed. Here authorizes public visits to Machar's residence under heavy security. September 26, 2025, Juba. President Salva Kiir Mayardit has permitted mass public visits to the residence of First Vice President Dr. Riek Machar in Juba's Amarat neighborhood, where Machar has been confined under house arrest since March. The National Security Service, NSS, has reinforced security around the compound, deploying additional personnel and checkpoints to control access and maintain order during the visits. Officials say the move is intended to ease tensions and demonstrate that Machar's rights are being respected as he awaits the resumption of his trial on September 29. He and several senior SPLMIO officials face charges of treason, murder, and crimes against humanity linked to the March attack on an SSPDF base in Nasir, Upper Nile State. Reactions to the decision were mixed. Some of Machar's supporters welcomed the chance to see him, describing the visit as a humanitarian gesture by the government. Others, however, questioned whether the allowance of mass visits was merely symbolic, given Machar's ongoing detention and the looming trial. Political analysts in Juba note that the timing of the visits could be a calculated move by Kiir's administration to reduce international criticism and ease tensions within the SPLMIO ahead of the court's verdict. The trial has drawn scrutiny from the UN and regional partners, who have urged that proceedings meet international human rights standards. Despite the gesture, the political climate remains fragile. Opposition factions allied with SPLMIO acting chairman Nathaniel Oyet, alongside NAS rebels led by General Thomas Cirillo, continue to carry out attacks against the SSPDF in western and central Equatoria, citing the collapse of the 2018 revitalized peace agreement. For now, Machar's residence remains under strict guard as the public is allowed limited access, with security services vowing to prevent any unrest. Protests in Unity State demand release of Machar and detained leaders. September 26, 2025, Unity State. Protests have entered their second consecutive day in Unity State, with demonstrators demanding the release of First Vice President Dr. Riek Machar and other senior political leaders currently detained in Juba. Crowds of mostly youth and women gathered in key towns across the state, chanting slogans, waving banners, and calling for an end to what they described as the political persecution of opposition leaders. Protesters also carried placards denouncing corruption and urging the government to revive the 2018 revitalized peace agreement. "We are calling for the immediate release of our leader Dr. Riek Machar and the others who were arrested. South Sudan cannot return to peace if our leaders are treated like prisoners," one protester in Bentiu told local media. Security forces were deployed to monitor the demonstrations, with witnesses reporting a heavy presence around government offices and major intersections. There were no confirmed reports of violence, though tensions remain high. The protests come amid heightened political uncertainty as Machar's trial is set to resume on September 29. He and 7 other SPLMIO leaders face charges including treason, murder, and crimes against humanity linked to the March attack on a South Sudan People's Defense Forces (SSPDF) base in Nasir, Upper Nile State. The trial has drawn international scrutiny, with the UN and regional bodies urging the government to ensure due process and uphold human rights standards. Earlier this week, UN Rights Chief Volker Turk warned that the situation in South Sudan is deteriorating rapidly, with rising civilian casualties and fears of a collapse of the peace agreement. Political analysts say the demonstrations in Unity State, considered a stronghold of Machar's SPLMIO, could spread to other opposition-supporting regions if the government does not take steps to ease tensions. Meanwhile, civil society activists have urged both the government and opposition to prioritize dialogue and reconciliation to prevent further unrest. The situation remains fluid, and protests are expected to continue in the coming days. Governor Louis Labong survives ambush attack in eastern Equatoria, Torit. Eastern Equatoria State Governor Louis Labong Lojor narrowly escaped an ambush attack on Friday morning, officials confirmed. The governor's convoy reportedly came under fire while traveling outside Torit, the state capital. According to initial accounts, security forces repelled the attackers, allowing the governor to proceed safely. State authorities have not disclosed who was behind the attack, but tensions remain high in eastern Equatoria, where armed groups and communal militias have carried out sporadic attacks in recent months. The governor is safe, but investigations are ongoing to establish the identity of the attackers, a senior state official told reporters under condition of anonymity. Governor Labong, one of South Sudan's longest-serving state leaders, has survived multiple security threats in the past, including clashes linked to local armed groups in Magui, Kapita, and Okotos counties. The ambush comes at a time of mounting national political tension, with protests spreading in Unity State over the detention of First Vice President Dr. Riek Machar and other senior opposition figures. Analysts warn that escalating insecurity at both state and national levels risks derailing the fragile peace process. Security has been tightened across Torit following the incident, and reinforcements have been deployed along key highways leading in and out of the capital. Authorities have urged the public to remain calm as investigations continue. UPDF deployment in South Sudan sparks outcry over civilian abuses. September 26, 2025, Juba. The presence of the Uganda People's Defense Forces, UPDF, in South Sudan is drawing growing criticism, with civil society groups, rights activists, and community leaders accusing Ugandan troops of worsening insecurity, displacing civilians, and committing serious human rights abuses. Rising civilian toll. Local monitors and humanitarian workers report that UPDF operations in several conflict-affected areas have led to widespread civilian displacement, arbitrary detentions, and alleged war crimes. Families fleeing clashes say they have faced harassment and looting at the hands of foreign troops. Instead of bringing security, the UPDF has terrorized communities. Civilians have been displaced, their homes destroyed, and people live in fear. a community leader in central Equatoria, told local media. Tens of thousands are believed to have been uprooted in recent months, with many fleeing into remote forests or across the borders into Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Aid groups warn that the humanitarian situation is deteriorating as access to food, medicine, and shelter remains limited. History of intervention. This is not the first time Uganda's army has intervened in South Sudan. During the 2013 to 2016 civil war, UPDF forces entered the country to back President Salva Kiir's government against opposition fighters led by Dr. Riek Machar. That deployment, which included air power and heavy weaponry, was widely condemned by the opposition and civil society as an escalation that deepened the conflict. Analysts say the current deployment echoes that earlier intervention, raising fears of further instability. The return of UPDF troops risks undermining South Sudan's fragile peace process and could inflame tensions among armed groups already skeptical of the government's intentions, said a regional political analyst. Calls for accountability. Civil society groups are now urging the South Sudanese government, IGAD, and the African Union to urgently review the UPDF's mandate in the country and hold soldiers accountable for any abuses. Regional security cooperation should not come at the cost of civilian lives, said rights activist Edmund Yakoni. The government must prioritize protecting its citizens, not enabling violations by foreign forces. Peace process at risk. The controversy comes as South Sudan faces deepening political and security crises. Protests are ongoing in Unity State over the detention of First Vice President Dr. Riek Machar, while rebel groups in Equatoria have intensified attacks on government positions. The UN Human Rights Office recently warned that the country is on the brink of returning to widespread conflict. Observers say that unless the role of UPDF troops is clarified and abuses addressed, the deployment could further erode trust in the 2018 revitalized peace agreement and complicate prospects for peace.
We also appreciate God for helping us in this time, and this is how Kiir met his own people. So we are exactly saying that we have separation, so we should not be combine it with Dinka again, health again, because this is how Dinka does. Because the Kiir made this one. This is not because of this is a tribal fighting, because Kiir wanted to genocide Nuer, which is not going to happen at all. And I hope we will achieve and we will have our own land, which is our fertile land, the Holy land. So we need only separation since Kiir has done this. So this is what is then happening. But it happened in this morning and nobody hurt, so long as God is still guiding us. This is how this morning. You can see we are not going to leave fighting or clear Dinkas away from Upper Nile. So we are heading to Upper Nile, even though it's trying to buy the international world to do this. So we wouldn't leave. We have to do it, and we have to fight. This is how things are going. Thank you very much. Yes.
Allegations of UPDF airstrikes against civilians in Nasir raise alarm, Upper Nile State. Civil society groups and community leaders in Upper Nile State have accused the Uganda People's Defense Forces, UPDF, of carrying out airstrikes against Nuer civilians in Nasir County, allegedly at the request of South Sudanese President Salva Kiir Mayardit. Eyewitnesses and local monitors claim Ugandan aircraft targeted residential areas during recent clashes between the South Sudan People's Defense Forces, SSPDF, and opposition forces loyal to Dr. Riek Machar, leading to mass displacement and civilian casualties. The Air Force bombed civilian villages in Nasir. Families fled with nothing, and many have been killed or injured. This was not a military target. It was our people, said one community elder, speaking on condition of anonymity. While the full extent of casualties remains unverified, humanitarian workers on the ground report that thousands have been displaced, with many crossing into Ethiopia to escape the violence. Political and regional implications. If confirmed, the alleged UPDF involvement would mark a serious escalation in South Sudan's conflict. Uganda previously intervened in South Sudan's civil war between 2013 and 2016, deploying ground troops and aircraft to back President Kiir against opposition forces. That intervention drew sharp criticism from rights groups, who accused UPDF of bombing civilian areas and committing abuses. The latest allegations have revived concerns that foreign military involvement is once again undermining the fragile 2018 revitalized peace agreement, already strained by Machar's detention and the resurgence of rebel activity in Equatoria. Calls for investigation. Human rights defenders are now calling for an independent international investigation into the reported airstrikes. Ordering or carrying out attacks on civilians constitutes a war crime under international law, said one Juba-based civil society activist. The role of UPDF and the responsibility of South Sudan's leadership must be scrutinized. Neither the South Sudanese government nor Ugandan authorities have issued an official response to the allegations. The situation in Nasir remains tense, with humanitarian agencies struggling to gain access to displaced populations.